Welcome back to Solentha Stories. Let's fuel your day with some intense passion and non-stop excitement. Grab your gear, we're moving into the story now.
At my sister-in-law's wedding, my mother-in-law publicly cornered me, demanding my penthouse keys in front of 45 stunned guests, mocking my ungrateful attitude as relatives whispered. When I refused, she slapped me so hard my earring flew. I walked out, made one quiet call, and the man who arrived left her shaking and screaming. "Did you bring the keys?" My mother-in-law Stella asked this in front of 45 wedding guests, her voice cheerful and expectant, as if I'd obviously brought the keys to my penthouse to hand over at my sister-in-law's reception. As if this had been planned and agreed upon. As if my home was something she could simply redistribute to whichever family member she decided needed it more than I did. "What keys?" I asked, though my stomach was already sinking because I knew exactly what she meant. "To the penthouse, dear." Stella smiled, that dangerous smile I'd learned to recognize over 3 years of marriage to her son. "I told Lucy and Marcus they could tour it tomorrow and start planning their move." Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these stories about standing your ground. If you believe boundaries matter more than family approval, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more people who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds. The garden reception went quiet around us. Guests turned to watch. Lucy looked confused in her wedding dress. My husband Nathan had gone pale beside me. And I realized with absolute clarity that this wasn't a misunderstanding or a miscommunication. This was a trap. Stella had just announced to everyone that I was giving away my penthouse. The home I'd bought with my own money, the symbol of everything I'd built alone, the one thing in my life that was completely mine. She'd created a public moment where refusing would make me look selfish, where social pressure would force me to surrender something I'd never agreed to give. What she didn't know was that my grandmother had prepared me for exactly this kind of family ambush. What she didn't know was that I had protections in place. What she didn't know was that the next 30 minutes would cost her more than she'd ever imagined. But I should start at the beginning. My name is Mila Ashford, I'm 34 years old. And this is the story of how I learned that sometimes protecting what you've built means burning down bridges you thought you needed. That penthouse Stella wanted to give away like it was some family heirloom or shared asset. I bought it when I was 29 years old. Paid cash. Every single dollar came from a bonus I earned after closing the Riverside development deal. A project my bosses at Meridian Financial Group had called too risky, too aggressive, too dependent on factors we couldn't control. I'd convinced them anyway, negotiated the terms myself, and 2 years later the property value had doubled. My bonus was $400,000, and instead of celebrating with vacations or cars or expensive dinners, I bought my home. 2,800 square feet on the 38th floor of the Harrison building. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. Italian marble countertops in the kitchen. A master bedroom with a view that made the city look like it was glowing every morning at sunrise. It wasn't just a place to live. It was proof that I'd made it, that I'd built something substantial on my own terms without depending on anyone else. I learned early that nothing worth having comes easy. My parents died in a car accident when I was 9 years old. One phone call changed everything. Suddenly I was an orphan being raised by my grandmother Margaret in her house that always smelled like lavender and old books. Margaret was what the rest of the Ashford family called the black sheep, though it took me years to understand why. She was a self-made real estate mogul who'd built an empire from nothing while her siblings squandered inherited money on bad investments and lifestyles they couldn't sustain. They'd come to her with their hands out, begging for loans they'd never repay, and she'd refuse every single time. They called her cold. They called her selfish. They said she'd forgotten what family meant. But Margaret taught me something different. She taught me that family who resent your achievements were never really family at all. That success earned through your own effort meant more than anything handed to you. That depending on others meant giving them power over your life, and that power was rarely returned without strings attached. "Build something that's yours, Mila," she'd tell me while we reviewed her property portfolios together, teaching me about investments and negotiations and the importance of reading every contract clause. "Build it so well that nobody can take it from you, and never apologize for succeeding when others chose to fail." I spent my 20s following that advice like it was gospel. I started at Meridian Financial Group as a junior analyst, the youngest person in my training class and the only woman. The men made jokes about me being hired to meet diversity quotas rather than because I'd graduated top of my class with a finance degree and 3 professor recommendations. I let them make their jokes. Then I outworked every single one of them. 80-hour weeks became my normal. I ate lunch at my desk, stayed late running financial models while everyone else went to happy hour, came in on weekends to review proposals that didn't need reviewing until Monday. I missed my college roommate's wedding because I was in Tokyo negotiating terms on a commercial property deal. I missed my grandmother's 75th birthday dinner because I had a presentation the next morning that I wasn't willing to deliver unprepared. People told me I was sacrificing too much, that there was more to life than work, that I'd regret missing all these moments. But they didn't understand what I was building. They didn't understand that every sacrifice was a brick in a foundation nobody else could shake. That every missed event was a choice to invest in myself instead of depending on others to provide security. The Riverside development deal was my breakout moment. Mixed-use property on the waterfront, retail space in a neighborhood where businesses kept failing, residential units priced too high for the location's reputation. Everyone said it wouldn't work. I saw what they didn't. The neighborhood was changing, new money moving in, old barriers breaking down. I put together a proposal that took me 3 weeks of 18-hour days. Presented to the client myself. Answered every objection. Negotiated terms that protected our firm's interests while giving the developer room to take calculated risks. The project broke ground 6 months later. 2 years after that, every residential unit had sold above asking price. Retail spaces had waiting lists and the property value had doubled. That's when I got the bonus. That's when I bought my penthouse. And the first night I slept there, lying on an air mattress because my furniture hadn't been delivered yet, I cried. Not sad tears, but the kind that come when you've fought for something so hard and so long that finally having it feels almost unreal. That penthouse represented every missed birthday, every holiday I'd worked through, every relationship that had drifted away because I'd put career first. It was proof that my grandmother had been right, that building something alone meant nobody could claim credit or use it against me or take it away. Or so I thought until I married into the Ashford family and met Stella. I met Nathan 3 years ago at a charity fundraiser I'd been dragged to by a colleague. One of those events where wealthy people pay too much for mediocre food and congratulate themselves for caring about causes they'll forget about within a week. Nathan was there because his mother sat on the organizing committee, but unlike most people in the room, he actually seemed interested in the cause rather than the social networking opportunities. We started talking about the keynote speaker's statistics on educational inequality. The conversation turned into a debate about systemic change versus individual intervention, which turned into coffee the next day that stretched into 6 hours of discussing everything except the shallow small talk most first dates revolve around. Nathan told me he'd grown up with family money but had chosen to become a high school history teacher because he loved it, not because he needed the salary. He talked about disappointing his mother by refusing business school, about being the dutiful son who was somehow never quite dutiful enough, about his younger sister Lucy being the golden child who could do no wrong. I told him about my grandmother's lessons, about learning that independence sometimes meant standing alone, about the penthouse that wasn't just a home but a symbol of everything I'd fought for. Nathan seemed to understand in a way most people didn't. When he proposed after a year of dating, he did it in my penthouse at sunrise. The city glowed orange beyond those massive windows, and Nathan promised that marrying him wouldn't mean surrendering the life I'd built. He said he respected my independence, my ambition, my need for space that belonged to me alone. I believed him. I said yes. The warning signs with Stella started small during our engagement. Comments about modern women prioritizing careers over family. Observations that my work schedule was awfully demanding for someone planning a wedding. Suggestions that maybe I should take a step back professionally once we were married. Nathan would deflect, change the subject, apologize later in private. He'd assure me his mother just needed time to adjust, that she came from a different generation with different expectations. But then came the dinner party. The moment I heard Stella telling her bridge club friends about our family's downtown property, describing my penthouse like she'd personally selected the fixtures and negotiated the purchase price. She talked about the square footage, the view, the marble countertops, accepting compliments on our taste in real estate. I pulled Nathan aside afterward. Told him we needed to set boundaries, make it absolutely clear that the penthouse was mine before the marriage and would remain separately owned. He looked uncomfortable. Said his mother was just proud to have family in such a nice building. Asked if I could let it go because correcting her would cause unnecessary tension. That was the moment I first wondered if Nathan's promises about respecting my independence would survive contact with his mother's expectations. That was the moment I first suspected I might have misjudged what I was marrying into. But I was patient. I told myself every marriage required compromise, that families were complicated, that Nathan just needed time to learn how to set boundaries with his mother. I was patient through 3 years of family dinners where Stella made passive-aggressive comments about women who outsource household responsibilities to focus on work. Patient through observations about how traditional values meant putting family first. Patient through her casual claims of ownership over my achievements, my property, my life. Nathan would apologize during the drives home. Promise it would get better once his mother got used to having a daughter-in-law. Ask me to be patient just a little longer. 3 years of patience. 3 years of forced smiles and bitten tongues. 3 years of Nathan's private apologies but never public defense. 3 years building toward this moment at Lucy's wedding, where Stella finally pushed too far and I learned exactly what my husband's promises were worth when tested against his mother's demands. Lucy's engagement to Marcus happened fast. They'd been dating only 8 months when he proposed over dinner at some Italian restaurant downtown, and suddenly our family group chat exploded with wedding planning messages. Stella threw herself into the preparations with an intensity I'd never seen before, like she was orchestrating a military campaign rather than an intimate family celebration. Lucy had wanted something simple and garden-themed, and within a week Stella had found the Hartwell Estate Gardens, a venue with manicured lawns, white rose trellises climbing up decorative arches, and a gazebo where vows would be exchanged under September sunshine. The guest list was kept deliberately small, just 45 people, which Stella mentioned repeatedly as proof of how exclusive and special the day would be. Close family and intimate friends only, she'd say at every family dinner, as if the small number somehow elevated the event's significance. No random acquaintances or business contacts cluttering up Lucy's special day. I offered to contribute financially. Nathan and I were doing well. My income alone could have covered the entire wedding, and Lucy was on a kindergarten teacher's salary while Marcus worked in pharmaceutical sales. They were stretched thin just covering their rent and student loans. But Stella shut down my offer immediately. Absolutely not, she'd said, waving her hand dismissively. This is a parent's privilege. William and I have it covered. At the time I thought she was just being proud. Maintaining appearances. Proving that she and William could still afford to give their daughter a proper wedding without help from anyone else. I didn't realize she was setting up a transaction where she'd expect payment later. 2 weeks before the wedding, Nathan's cousin Rachel caught me at a family barbecue and pulled me aside near the drink cooler. So what are you guys giving Lucy and Marcus? She asked casually, reaching for a beer. I blinked at her. What do you mean? For the wedding. Your gift. Rachel's expression shifted from casual to confused. Stella's been telling everyone you and Nathan are planning something really generous. She's been kind of mysterious about the details, but she made it sound like a big deal. My stomach dropped. She said that. Yeah, like 3 weeks ago. She told my mom you guys were giving them something that would really set them up for their future together. Rachel studied my face. You didn't know she was saying this? No. The word came out sharper than I'd intended. Rachel's confusion deepened into concern. Mila, what's going on? I have no idea, but I'm about to find out. That night, I confronted Nathan the moment we got home. He was in the kitchen making tea, and the second I asked him about Stella telling people we were planning some generous gift for Lucy, his face went pale. Nathan. My voice was calm but firm. What is she talking about? He set down the kettle carefully, not meeting my eyes. Mom mentioned something a few weeks ago. Maybe 6 weeks. It wasn't a big deal. What did she mention? She said that Lucy and Marcus were starting their lives together and they'd need more space eventually, and that since it's just the two of us in the penthouse, maybe we could help them out by, he stopped, finally looking at me, by giving them the downtown property. The words hung in the air between us like something toxic. And what did you say? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I told her no. Immediately. I said the penthouse is yours, that you bought it before we even met, that it wasn't up for discussion. Nathan moved toward me, hands raised like he was approaching something skittish. Mila, I shut it down completely. I thought it was over. Then why is she telling people we're planning a generous gift? I don't know. Maybe she's just being dramatic. You know how she gets about weddings. Why didn't you tell me about this conversation? Nathan hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. I didn't want to stress you out over something I'd already handled. You've been working on that merger deal, and I knew this would upset you, and the problem was already solved, so I didn't see the point in creating conflict when what, Nathan? When you could just keep your mother's behavior secret and hope I never found out. That's not what I was doing. Then what were you doing? My voice was rising now, anger finally breaking through. Because from where I'm standing, you protected yourself from having to deal with my reaction instead of protecting me from your mother's entitlement. We fought that night. Really fought, the kind of argument where things get said that can't be unsaid. Nathan insisted he'd done everything right, that he'd set a clear boundary with his mother, and I was overreacting. I told him that keeping her boundary violations secret wasn't the same as handling them, that I had a right to know when his mother was planning to give away my property. We went to bed angry, the space between us in the darkness feeling wider than the few inches it actually was. In the morning, Nathan apologized. Said he'd talk to Stella again before the wedding, make absolutely sure she understood the penthouse wasn't available, that he'd stand up to her if she brought it up again. I wanted to believe him. But a small voice in my head whispered that Nathan would always choose peace over confrontation, even when confrontation was necessary. The morning of the wedding, Nathan was off. Nervous in a way that went beyond normal pre-event jitters. He checked his phone constantly during breakfast, barely touched his eggs, seemed distracted when I asked him simple questions about what time we needed to leave. Is something wrong? I asked as we drove to the venue. No, just worried about Mom being stressed. Big family events always make her anxious. I want everything to go smoothly for Lucy. We arrived at Hartwell Estate Gardens 2 hours early to help with setup. The venue was gorgeous. Exactly the kind of place you'd see in wedding magazines. White roses everywhere, climbing up trellises and adorning the gazebo, arranged in careful clusters on tables draped with cream-colored linens. String lights were being hung between trees, ready to twinkle once evening came. Stella was already there in full command mode, directing a florist to adjust a centerpiece, telling the caterers their tablecloth choices were wrong, repositioning chairs that looked perfectly fine to me. The moment she spotted me, her eyes traveled from my face down to my emerald silk dress. Her mouth tightened in that way I'd learned to recognize as incoming criticism. Mila, you're finally here. She made finally sound like an accusation even though we were 2 hours early. That dress. Did you not read the color palette email? We specifically said jewel tones for the wedding party only. I smoothed down the silk. This is emerald. That's a jewel tone. It's too flashy. You're not the bride, dear. Nathan squeezed my hand in what I think was meant to be solidarity, but he said nothing. He never did when it came to his mother. The ceremony itself was beautiful in that predictable way weddings often are. Lucy looked radiant in her lace gown, tears streaming down her face during her vows. Marcus actually choked up when he promised to love her in sickness and health. Guests dabbed at their eyes with tissues while the string quartet played something classical and romantic in the background. I watched Nathan watching his sister, his expression complicated. Happiness mixed with something I couldn't quite identify. Maybe wistfulness. Maybe envy that his younger sister had reached this milestone while his own marriage felt increasingly strained by his mother's interference. After the ceremony, during cocktail hour, I stood near the bar with Rachel, sipping champagne and making small talk about the ceremony. That's when I noticed Stella making rounds through the crowd with very deliberate purpose. She'd pull someone aside, an aunt, a family friend, one of Lucy's bridesmaids, lean in close for a conversation that lasted maybe 30 seconds, then move on to the next person. Each time she finished one of these whispered exchanges, the person would glance toward me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Curiosity mixed with something else. Judgment maybe. Expectation. My stomach started to knot. Mila, Rachel said quietly beside me, I think you should know something. I turned to her, champagne glass frozen halfway to my lips. Stella's been making rounds. Telling people that you and Nathan are making a generous gift to Lucy and Marcus today. She's being really specific about it now. Like really specific. The garden seemed to tilt slightly. What kind of gift? Rachel hesitated, her face full of sympathy. Your penthouse. She's saying you're giving them your penthouse. That it's all arranged, that the announcement will come during the toasts. The champagne glass trembled in my hand. The world had narrowed to Rachel's words and the realization spreading through me like ice water. This wasn't going to be a private conversation. This wasn't going to be a family discussion that could be handled quietly and diplomatically. This was going to be a public ambush, designed to use social pressure and wedding day sentiment to force my compliance. Stella had created a situation where refusing would make me look selfish, where saying no would ruin Lucy's special day, where standing my ground would turn 45 guests against me. I looked across the garden and found Nathan standing near the appetizer table, shoving bacon-wrapped dates into his mouth like a man who knew a storm was coming and wanted to fortify himself first. He'd known. He'd known this morning when he was checking his phone constantly, when he could barely eat breakfast, when he'd seemed so anxious during the drive. He'd known his mother was planning this and he'd said nothing. I crossed the garden toward Nathan, weaving between cocktail tables and guests who were too busy chatting to notice the storm building inside me. He was still at the appetizer table, reaching for another bacon-wrapped date like food could somehow fortify him against what was coming. "Did you know about this?" I asked, keeping my voice low enough that nearby guests wouldn't hear. Nathan's hand froze halfway to his mouth. The guilt on his face answered my question before he even opened his mouth. "I didn't know it would be like this," he said quickly. "I didn't know she'd make it public. Mila, I swear. You knew something was coming." I thought. He set down the date, finally meeting my eyes. "This morning she texted me saying she had a special surprise for Lucy during the toasts. I thought maybe she was giving them money or furniture or something normal. I didn't think she'd actually announce the penthouse thing after I told her no." "And you didn't think to warn me? To give me a heads up that your mother might pull something?" "I didn't want to ruin the day with family drama. I was hoping she'd actually respect boundaries for once." His voice dropped even lower. "I was wrong. I'm sorry." I looked at my husband standing there with defeat written all over his face, bacon-wrapped dates forgotten on his plate, and something crystallized inside me. This was the pattern. This would always be the pattern. Nathan would try to manage his mother in private, fail, then apologize to me after the damage was done. His love for me would always lose to his fear of his mother's anger. "After today," I said quietly, "things are going to change. I'm done absorbing tension to keep your family comfortable. I'm done pretending your mother's behavior is acceptable. I'm done being patient while you avoid conflict." Nathan nodded, promised he'd do better, but the words felt hollow. 3 years of the same promises, 3 years of the same pattern. Why would today be any different? Before I could say anything else, the delicate chime of fork against champagne glass rang out across the garden. Once, twice, 3 times. The conversations around us died down. People turned toward the gazebo where Lucy and Marcus stood, surrounded by their wedding party. Stella stood beside them, microphone in hand, smiling that bright country club smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Before we continue with the traditional toasts," she began, her voice carrying across the garden with practiced authority, "I want to acknowledge something very special that's happening today." My stomach dropped. "Family is everything to the Ashford family," Stella continued, looking out at the crowd with that expression of maternal pride she'd perfected over decades. "We believe in taking care of each other, in helping our children build strong foundations for their futures. That's what real family does. We support each other, we sacrifice for each other, we put each other first." Nathan's grip on my arm tightened. Several guests were already smiling, anticipating something heartwarming. "And today," Stella said, her smile widening, "we have a perfect example of that kind of generosity. Mila and Nathan have graciously decided to give Lucy and Marcus their downtown penthouse as a wedding present." The applause erupted immediately. Enthusiastic, genuine applause. People turned to look at us, beaming, nodding their approval. Someone near the back actually whistled. A few guests raised their champagne glasses in a silent toast to our supposed generosity. I stood completely frozen, my own champagne glass trembling slightly in my hand. 45 pairs of eyes on me, expecting me to smile, to wave, to graciously accept their approval for a gift I'd never agreed to give. Lucy's mouth had fallen open in what looked like genuine shock. She turned to Marcus, who looked equally confused, his eyes darting between Stella and us. That's incredibly generous," Marcus said slowly, uncertainty creeping into his voice. But Lucy, did we know about this? Lucy shook her head, still looking stunned. Come on up here, you two, Stella called out, waving us forward like we were contestants on a game show. Let's have the whole family together for this special moment. The crowd was still applauding, waiting, expecting us to walk up to that gazebo and complete this beautiful family tableau. Nathan's face had gone sheet white. Mom, what are you doing? He called out, but his voice was weak, uncertain. But Stella wasn't listening. She was playing to her audience, soaking in the attention, reveling in her role as the matriarch orchestrating this display of family unity. I set down my champagne glass with deliberate care. Every eye in that garden was on me now, sensing perhaps that something wasn't quite right. I walked toward the gazebo. Not because I was agreeing to anything, but because I wasn't going to have this conversation shouted across a garden. Nathan followed a step behind me, his hand hovering near my elbow but not quite touching, as if he couldn't decide whether supporting me or maintaining distance was the safer choice. The crowd quieted as we approached. Their smiles were starting to falter, picking up on the tension radiating from both of us. Stella, I said when I reached the gazebo, keeping my voice calm and level, can we speak privately? There's nothing private about family generosity, dear. She was still smiling, but something sharp flickered behind her eyes. Now, did you bring the keys? I told Lucy and Marcus they could go see the place tomorrow and start planning their move. The presumption of it, the sheer audacity, took my breath away for a moment. I didn't bring the keys, I said clearly, because I'm not giving them the penthouse. The words landed like a physical blow. The collective gasp from 45 guests was audible. Even the string quartet seemed to stop playing, though maybe that was just my imagination. Stella's smile didn't falter, but her eyes went cold. Don't be silly, Mila. We discussed this. No. You discussed this. I was never asked. I never agreed. The garden had gone completely silent now. Not even the breeze seemed to dare make a sound. This is Lucy's wedding day, Stella said, her voice taking on that dangerous sweetness that always preceded explosions. You're really going to embarrass her like this? In front of everyone? I'm not embarrassing anyone. I'm stating a fact. My property is not available to give away. Lucy stepped forward, her wedding dress rustling. Mila, if this is about money, we can figure something out. We could pay you over time or... It's not about money, Lucy. I turned to look at her, saw the confusion and hurt in her eyes, and felt bad that she was caught in the middle of this. It's about the fact that the penthouse is mine. I bought it. I own it. And I'm not giving it to anyone. Nathan finally found his voice. Mom, I told you weeks ago this wasn't going to happen. I told you not to bring it up. Oh, Nathan, don't be ridiculous. Stella waved her hand dismissively. It's just a property. You two don't even need that much space. It's just the two of you. Lucy and Marcus want to start a family. They need the room. Then they should buy their own place, I said firmly. Something cracked in Stella's expression, the country club polish giving way to raw anger. You ungrateful little, she caught herself, glancing at the watching crowd. Then with forced control, after everything this family has done for you, after we welcomed you with open arms, treated you like a daughter. You've treated me like an asset, I interrupted. There's a difference. How dare you? Stella's voice had dropped to something dangerous. We included you in everything. We made you part of this family. And this is how you repay us. By refusing to help your sister-in-law on her wedding day. The guests were shifting uncomfortably now. I could see the judgment forming on some faces. The selfish sister-in-law refusing to help family, causing drama at a wedding. Nathan tried to intervene. Mom, please. Let's just... No, Nathan. Stella stepped closer to me, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume mixing with champagne on her breath. She needs to learn what family means. You're going to give Lucy those keys right now, or what? I asked quietly. For a moment we just stared at each other. I watched the calculation happen behind her eyes. Back down and lose face or escalate in forced submission. She chose escalation. Her hand came up fast, connecting with my cheek with a crack that echoed across the silent garden. The force snapped my head to the side and I felt my grandmother's diamond earring, the one she'd given me before she died, come loose and go flying somewhere into the landscaping. 45 people gasped in unison. Then silence. Complete absolute silence. I stood there, cheek burning, heat spreading across my face. The photographer's camera had stopped clicking. Wait staff stood frozen. Even the children who'd been playing near the fountain had gone quiet. Stella's hand was still raised, suspended in the air as if she couldn't quite believe what she'd just done. Neither could I. Slowly, deliberately, I reached up and touched my cheek. When I lowered my hand, I looked at Stella. Really looked at her and saw exactly what she was. This woman would never see me as family. I would always be the obstacle, the thing standing between her and complete control. "Excuse me," I said, my voice perfectly steady despite everything. I turned to Lucy. "Congratulations on your marriage. I hope you find happiness." Then I walked away. I didn't run. I didn't storm off in tears or dramatic fury. I just walked. One foot in front of the other, heels clicking on the stone pathway that wound through the garden toward the parking lot. Each step measured and deliberate, like I was leaving a business meeting rather than my sister-in-law's wedding reception where I'd just been slapped in front of 45 people. Behind me, chaos erupted. "Madison." Nathan's voice, desperate and panicked. "Madison, wait." I didn't turn around. Didn't pause. Didn't give him or anyone else the satisfaction of seeing me break. The whispers exploded like wildfire. I could hear fragments of shocked conversations, Stella's voice rising in what sounded like justifications or explanations, someone crying, probably Lucy, and the confused murmurs of guests trying to process what they'd just witnessed. The walk felt endless. The parking lot was maybe 100 yards away, but each step seemed to stretch the distance. My face throbbed in time with my heartbeat, a steady burning pulse where Stella's hand had connected. My jaw ached from clenching it so hard. My hands trembled slightly at my sides, adrenaline flooding my system even as I maintained that calm, measured pace. I'd spent 3 years absorbing Stella's criticism. 3 years of Nathan's conflict avoidance. 3 years of being treated like an asset the family could redistribute as they saw fit. I was done. Not with anger. Not with drama. But with the quiet, absolute finality of someone who'd just watched the last thread of tolerance snap completely. When I finally reached the parking lot, I leaned against my car for a moment, allowing myself one deep breath. Then I pulled out my phone. My hands were steadier than they should have been as I scrolled through my contacts. Gregory Parrish. My grandmother's lawyer for 40 years. Mine for the past decade. The man who'd helped me set up the legal protections around my penthouse specifically because he'd watched Margaret fight similar battles with entitled family members her entire life. He answered on the second ring. "Mila? Everything all right?" His voice was calm, professional, but I could hear the concern underneath. Gregory had an instinct for trouble, probably developed over 4 decades of high-stakes legal work. "Gregory, I need you at the Hartwell Estate Gardens. No. And bring the Ashford Family Trust documents. All of them." There was a pause. Then, what happened? Stella just assaulted me in front of 45 witnesses while trying to coerce me into surrendering my property. "I'm invoking the protective clauses." Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear his legal mind working through implications and strategies, calculating angles and consequences. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said finally. "Stay where you are. Don't engage with anyone. And Mila?" "Yes. Document everything. If there are witnesses willing to give statements, get their contact information." The whole thing was caught on video. The wedding videographer was filming the toasts. Perfect. There was something almost satisfied in his tone. "I'll see you shortly." I ended the call and stood there in the parking lot, phone still in my hand, letting the reality of what I'd just set in motion wash over me. This wasn't going to be a quiet family disagreement anymore. This was going to be legal. Permanent. My cheek was swelling. I could feel it, the heat and pressure building under the skin where Stella's hand had landed. I walked back toward the venue entrance where I'd seen a first aid station earlier, grabbed an ice pack from the attendant who looked at my face with wide eyes but asked no questions, and returned to my car. Sitting on the curb with the ice pack pressed against my face, I finally let myself feel something other than adrenaline-fueled control. Not tears. I wasn't ready for tears yet. But exhaustion. The bone-deep weariness that comes when you realize you've been fighting a losing battle for years and finally have permission to stop. My phone started buzzing. Text after text lighting up the screen. "Nathan, we need to talk. Please. Nathan, I'm so sorry. I didn't know she'd do that." Nathan, where are you? Are you okay? Rachel, OMG, are you okay? Do you need anything? An unknown number. I can't believe what I just saw. Your mother-in-law is insane. Another unknown number. You had that coming. Family means sacrifice. I turned off notifications and set the phone face down beside me. I didn't have the energy to sort through who was supporting me and who was judging me. Not yet. The ice pack numbed my cheek, a cold relief against the burning. I closed my eyes and let my mind drift back to my grandmother. Margaret had warned me about this. Not specifically about Stella or this exact scenario, but about the pattern. About how families who felt entitled to your success would eventually demand payment for acceptance you'd never actually received. The Ashford family has always been like this, she told me once, maybe 5 years ago when I'd first started making real money. We were sitting in her study, reviewing trust documents, and she'd looked at me with those sharp eyes that never missed anything. They believe success should be redistributed among the family, that individual achievement is somehow selfish unless it benefits the collective. They resented me for refusing to subsidize their poor choices, for building something that was mine alone. But you left them your real estate empire, I'd said. That's worth millions. I left them the business because it requires work to maintain. I left you the liquid assets and the protections because you're the only one who inherited my spine along with my name. She'd smiled then, a fierce pride in her expression. They'll come for what you build eventually, Mila. And when they do, you'll need to be ready to defend it. I'd thought she was being dramatic. Paranoid even. The rest of the Ashford family had always been polite enough at gatherings, if somewhat distant. I'd thought maybe Margaret's black sheep status had colored her view of them, made her see enemies where there were just complicated family dynamics. But she'd been right. The protective clauses in the trust weren't just legal formalities. They were weapons Margaret had forged specifically for battles like this one. If anyone tried to coerce a beneficiary into surrendering protected assets, the trust could intervene with financial penalties severe enough to make the aggressor regret ever making the attempt. Stella had no idea what she'd just triggered. She'd thought slapping me was the power move, the ultimate assertion of dominance that would put me in my place and force my compliance. She'd actually just handed me everything I needed to fight back with the full force of my grandmother's carefully constructed legal fortress. A black Mercedes pulled into the parking lot exactly 19 minutes after I'd called. Gregory emerged in his typical fashion, three-piece suit despite it being a Saturday, silver hair perfectly combed, briefcase in hand. He'd been in his late 50s when my grandmother died, and in the decade since he'd aged into distinguished rather than old, the kind of lawyer who walked into courtrooms and boardrooms with quiet confidence that made opponents nervous. He walked straight to me and I lowered the ice pack. The bruise was already forming. I could see it in Gregory's expression, the way his jaw tightened, the flash of anger in his eyes that he quickly controlled. 45 witnesses? He asked. Plus video footage. The wedding videographer was filming when it happened. And she was attempting to coerce you into surrendering the penthouse? She'd already announced to everyone that I was giving it to Lucy and Marcus. Made it public before even asking me. When I refused, she escalated. Gregory nodded slowly, setting his briefcase on the hood of my car and opening it. Then let's go have a conversation with Stella about the consequences of assaulting trust beneficiaries. He pulled out a folder thick with documents and I recognized the trust paperwork. The protections Margaret had insisted on, the penalty clauses that could be triggered, the legal mechanisms that would turn Stella's moment of rage into financial devastation. Are you ready for this? Gregory asked, looking at me with concern that went beyond professional courtesy. He'd known me since I was 24, had guided me through my grandmother's death and the inheritance that followed. Once we do this, there's no going back. Your relationship with Nathan's family will never recover. I thought about that for maybe 3 seconds. They slapped me at a wedding because I wouldn't give them my home, I said quietly. There's nothing to recover. Gregory smiled, not a happy smile but the kind a shark might give before it strikes. Then let's go to work. We walked back to the garden together, Gregory and I side by side, and I watched it happen in real time. The moment people recognized him, the way conversations died mid-sentence, how heads turned and eyes widened. Gregory Parrish wasn't just any lawyer. He was the kind of attorney whose name appeared in the business section when high-profile estate battles made headlines. The kind who'd spent 40 years navigating the ugliest parts of family wealth disputes and had a reputation for being both brilliant and ruthless when the situation called for it. And he was walking into Lucy's wedding reception with me, his briefcase in hand and a look on his face that suggested someone was about to have a very bad day. The reception had descended into chaos in my absence. Small clusters of guests stood in tight circles, whispering urgently. Some were stealing glances toward the bar where Stella held court with her closest friends, gesturing animatedly as she no doubt spun her version of events. Lucy sat at a table near the gazebo, mascara running, with Marcus's arm around her shoulders. Nathan stood alone by the fountain, staring at his phone like it might provide answers he couldn't find anywhere else. The moment Gregory and I stepped onto the patio, every conversation stopped. Completely. The silence was so sudden it felt physical. Stella's face went through a remarkable transformation. First confusion. Who was this man in the expensive suit? Then recognition, her eyes widened slightly, her mouth opening just a fraction. Finally, something close to panic as she understood exactly what Gregory's presence meant. She knew who he was. Every Ashford knew who Gregory Parrish was. Mrs. Ashford. Gregory's voice carried across the garden with effortless authority. Not loud but commanding in a way that made people lean in to hear better. I'm Gregory Parrish, executor of the Margaret Ashford Estate Trust. We need to discuss what just happened here. I watched Stella's friends take subtle steps backward, distancing themselves. They'd gone from offering support to wanting plausible deniability in the span of seconds. I don't know what Mila told you, Stella began, her voice attempting that same cheerful authority she'd used during the toast. But this is a family matter. The bruise on my client's face suggests otherwise. Gregory gestured toward me with one hand. As does the footage I'm told exists of you assaulting her while attempting to coerce her into surrendering property. Nathan had moved closer now, his face pale and drawn. Mom, what did you do? I didn't do anything. Stella's voice had gone sharp, defensive. I simply suggested that Mila and Nathan could help Lucy. You announced without permission that they were giving away Mila's property, Gregory interrupted smoothly. Then when she refused, you struck her. In front of witnesses. While she was attempting to protect assets that are held under specific protective provisions of the Margaret Ashford Estate Trust. He set his briefcase on the nearest table and opened it with deliberate care. Every eye in the garden watched as he pulled out a thick folder of documents. Let me read you something, Mrs. Ashford. Gregory adjusted his glasses and found the relevant page. This is from Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the trust documents. Should any individual attempt to coerce, manipulate, pressure, or otherwise compel a trust beneficiary into surrendering protected assets, said individual shall be deemed in violation of the trust's protective provisions and shall be subject to immediate financial penalty as determined by the executor. The color was draining from Stella's face. That's absurd. This is my family. Mila became a trust beneficiary when she inherited from Margaret Ashford, Gregory continued, his tone clinical and precise. The penthouse in question was purchased with trust funds. It is, therefore, a protected asset. Your attempt to take it, and your assault on Mila when she refused, triggers the penalty clause. Lucy had stopped crying. She was staring at her mother with an expression I'd never seen before, shock mixed with something darker. Betrayal maybe. Or the dawning realization that she'd been a pawn in something much uglier than she'd understood. Mom, Lucy's voice was barely above a whisper. You hit her. She was being unreasonable. You hit your daughter-in-law at my wedding because she wouldn't give me her house? Lucy's voice was rising now. A house I didn't even know she was supposedly giving us until you announced it? Marcus put a steadying hand on his new wife's shoulder. Lucy, maybe we should. No. Lucy shook her head, pulling away from him. No, this is insane. Mila, I'm so sorry. I had no idea any of this was happening. I didn't ask for your house. I never wanted your house. I know, I said quietly, the first words I'd spoken since Gregory and I had walked back into the garden. This was never about you, Lucy. Nathan finally found his voice. Mom, you need to apologize. Right now. But Stella wasn't listening to Nathan. She was staring at Gregory with dawning horror. What penalty? Gregory's expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight curve at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. More like the expression of someone who'd been waiting for exactly that question. The trust has the authority to place a lien on any assets you hold that were derived from the original Ashford estate, he explained calmly. That would include the monthly stipend you receive from the family trust. Approximately $8,000 per month if I recall correctly. It would include the lake house in Pine Ridge that was gifted to you 15 years ago, currently valued at roughly $1.2 million. And it would include the investment portfolio Margaret established for her children before her death, which in your case represents approximately $600,000 in securities. Stella swayed slightly like the ground had shifted under her feet. You can't do that. I can and I will. Gregory closed the folder. Unless, he paused, letting the word hang in the air. Unless Mila decides to show mercy and accept a formal public apology along with an agreement that you will never again attempt to pressure her regarding her assets. Every eye in that garden turned to me. I looked at Stella. Really looked at her. This woman who'd spent 3 years making me feel like an outsider. Who'd criticized my career, my choices, my very existence in her family. Who just slapped me in front of 45 people because I wouldn't surrender something I'd earned. I want the apology, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent garden. Here, no, in front of everyone. And I want it in writing that you acknowledge the penthouse is mine and mine alone, that you have no claim to it, and that you'll never ask me for it again. Stella looked like she might be physically ill. Her face had gone from flushed to ashen, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. And if I refuse? Her voice was barely audible. Then Mr. Parrish will execute the penalty clauses, I replied. And you can explain to William why your monthly income just disappeared, along with the lake house you've been using for family gatherings for the past 15 years. I watched the calculation happen behind Stella's eyes. Pride versus financial security. Her reputation versus her lifestyle. The satisfaction of refusing to apologize versus losing everything Margaret had given her. Took maybe 15 seconds. I apologize, she said, the words coming out stiff and mechanical. I shouldn't have struck you. And I acknowledge that the penthouse is your property. And? Gregory prompted. Stella's jaw clenched. And I will never ask you for it again. It wasn't heartfelt. It wasn't even particularly sincere. The words were forced out through what looked like physical pain, each syllable a small defeat. But it was public. It was witnessed by 45 guests. And it was going to be legally documented. Good enough, I said. Gregory pulled a pen from his briefcase. I'll prepare the formal documents for signature. They'll be ready by Monday morning. Mrs. Ashford, you'll report to my office at 9 a.m. to sign them. Bring William with you, he'll need to witness. The garden remained silent. No one seemed to know what to do or say. The wedding celebration had transformed into something else entirely. A legal proceeding, a public humiliation, a family fracture that couldn't be hidden or smoothed over. Lucy stood up from her table, wedding dress trailing behind her as she walked toward her mother. For a moment I thought she might offer comfort or support. Instead, she looked at Stella with tears streaming down her face and said, I think you should leave. Stella opened her mouth, closed it, then looked around at the guests who were all very carefully not meeting her eyes. Fine, she said finally, her voice brittle. William, we're going. Nathan's father, who'd been standing silently near the edge of the patio this entire time, nodded and followed his wife toward the parking lot. They left without another word, Stella's heels clicking angrily on the stone path, William trailing behind like a ghost. The moment they were gone, the garden collectively exhaled. The garden remained suspended in that collective exhale, everyone processing what they'd just witnessed. Stella and William's departure had left a vacuum, and nobody seemed quite sure what should happen next. Gregory stood beside me, briefcase still open on the table, documents visible to anyone curious enough to look. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just waited with that patient stillness that made his presence feel both protective and intimidating. Lucy was the first to break the silence. She walked toward me slowly, wedding dress trailing across the grass, mascara streaked down her face. When she reached me, she didn't say anything at first. Just looked at me with red-rimmed eyes full of something I'd never seen from her before. Genuine understanding maybe, or shame. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I didn't know. I swear, Mila, I didn't know any of this was happening. I know you didn't, I said softly. None of this is your fault, Lucy. It's my wedding. She did this at my wedding. Lucy's voice cracked. She hit you at my wedding over a house I never asked for, never even knew about. Marcus appeared at her side, gently taking her arm. Luce, we should probably go, I finished for him. You should go enjoy what's left of your day. Don't let this ruin everything. But we all knew it already had. The rest of the reception limped along for another hour. Guests making awkward small talk, the string quartet playing to an audience that wasn't really listening anymore, waiters serving cake that nobody seemed to have much appetite for. Nathan stood near the fountain, phone in his hand, looking lost. When our eyes met across the garden, he started toward me, but I shook my head slightly. Not here. Not now. Gregory touched my elbow gently. I'm going to go, he said quietly. But I'll have the formal documents drawn up by Monday morning. Stella will come to my office to sign them, or the penalty clauses activate automatically. Those are her only options. Thank you, Gregory. He studied my face for a moment, professional concern shifting to something more personal. Your grandmother would be proud of you. You know that, right? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. After he left, I found myself standing alone near the dessert table, the same spot where this nightmare had begun just a few hours earlier. Rachel approached carefully, like someone approaching a spooked animal. You okay? She asked. Not even a little bit. She laughed, a short burst of surprised sound. Fair enough. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Stella's been like this for years. Someone needed to stand up to her eventually. Doesn't feel like winning. It rarely does, Rachel said. But you protected yourself. That matters. Lucy and Marcus left shortly after that, cutting their departure early to escape to their honeymoon. Lucy hugged me before she left, whispering another apology I told her she didn't need to give. Marcus shook my hand, his expression a mix of embarrassment and respect. Thank you for not letting her steamroll you, he said quietly. Lucy needs to see that it's possible to say no to her mother. The remaining guests trickled away over the next 30 minutes, some offering sympathetic words, others avoiding eye contact entirely. I could see the camps forming already. Those who thought I'd been justified, and those who thought I'd caused unnecessary drama at a family wedding. Nathan and I were among the last to leave. We walked to the car in silence, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down like humidity before a storm. The drive home was suffocating. I stared out the window watching the city pass by, my cheeks still throbbing despite the ibuprofen I'd taken. The bruise was fully formed now, a vivid red mark in the perfect shape of Stella's hand, impossible to hide or ignore. Nathan's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Twice he opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, words apparently failing him. We pulled into the parking garage of my building, my penthouse, the home I'd fought for, and rode the elevator in continued silence. Each floor that passed felt like another layer of tension building between us. Inside the penthouse, I went straight to the bathroom and examined my face in the mirror. The bruise looked worse under the bright lights. My grandmother's diamond earring was still missing, probably lost forever in the rose bushes at the Hartwell Estate Gardens. When I came back out, Nathan was standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights below. His reflection in the glass showed defeat in every line of his body. I should have protected you, he said without turning around. I should have shut this down the first time she mentioned the penthouse. I should have warned you she might try something public. I should have stood beside you immediately when she made that announcement instead of freezing like a coward. His voice cracked on the last word and I heard genuine remorse there. Pain. Shame. Yes, I said simply. You should have done all those things. He turned to face me then, eyes red-rimmed. I'm so sorry, Mila. I know saying it doesn't fix anything, but I am. I'm sorry I let her do this to you. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to stop her. I walked to the couch and sat down, suddenly exhausted. Nathan, being sorry after the fact isn't the same as being brave enough to prevent it in the first place. I know. Do you? I looked at him directly. Because this pattern has been happening for 3 years. Your mother pushes boundaries, I push back, you apologize in private but never defend me in public. Today was just the most extreme version of what's been happening all along. Nathan moved to sit beside me but stopped when he saw my expression. He sat in the armchair across from me instead, maintaining distance. Things are going to be different, he said. I promise. The next time she tries something. There's going to be a next time, I interrupted. You understand that, right? That legal document Gregory is preparing? It'll stop her from going after my property, but it won't change who she is. She'll find other ways to test boundaries, to try to control us, to punish me for standing up to her. Then I'll stand with you. In the moment. Publicly. Immediately. Will you? I asked quietly. Because promising that now after everything's already exploded is easy. The hard part is doing it in the moment when she's manipulating you, when she's playing the hurt mother, when standing up to her means dealing with her anger and guilt trips and punishment. Nathan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. I don't know how to be the husband you need me to be and the son she raised me to be. Those things feel incompatible. Then you need to choose, I said, my voice steady despite the fear those words created. Because I can't keep being the one who loses when you try to be both. We sat in silence for a long time after that. The city glowed beyond the windows, oblivious to the fractures spreading through my marriage, through Nathan's family, through the life we tried to build together. Eventually Nathan went to bed. I stayed on the couch, watching the lights and thinking about my grandmother's words from years ago. Protection sometimes costs relationships. But you can't protect yourself if you're too afraid to pay the price. 3 days later, Gregory arrived at my office with a leather folder. He set it on my desk with quiet satisfaction. Stella came to my office this morning, he said. 9 a.m. sharp, William in tow. She signed everything. I opened the folder. The documents were thorough. Formal relinquishment of any claims to my property, agreement to maintain appropriate boundaries, penalty clauses that would activate immediately if she violated the terms. Stella's signature was tight and angry-looking, the letters pressed hard into the paper. This protects you legally, Gregory said. But Mila, you need to understand, this doesn't protect you from everything. Stella can't go after your property now, but she can make your life difficult in other ways. She can poison family relationships, manipulate Nathan, turn people against you. I know. He studied me for a moment. Your grandmother went through something similar with her siblings. Lost most of them when she stopped subsidizing their poor choices. She never regretted it, but she also never pretended it didn't hurt. I filed the documents in my office safe, next to copies of my penthouse deed and my grandmother's will. Tangible proof that some women in my family had always understood that loving yourself sometimes means letting others hate you for refusing to be diminished. That night, looking at those documents, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not victory but grief. Grief for the family I'd thought I was marrying into, for the mother-in-law who might have accepted me if I'd been less successful or more willing to surrender what I'd built, for the easier path I couldn't take because taking it would mean losing myself. Protection had cost me. I just wasn't sure yet how much the final bill would be. 2 weeks after the wedding, Nathan and I met Lucy and Marcus for dinner at a small Italian restaurant downtown. Their choice, neutral territory, somewhere that didn't carry the weight of family history or expectations. Lucy and Marcus arrived tan from their honeymoon, holding hands, looking like newlyweds should look. But there was something else in Lucy's expression when she hugged me, a heaviness that vacation sunshine hadn't quite erased. We made small talk through appetizers. The weather in Bali. The hotel they'd stayed at. How Marcus had gotten food poisoning on day 3 and spent 12 hours convinced he was dying. Lucy laughed telling the story, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. When Nathan and Marcus got distracted discussing some basketball game, Lucy leaned toward me across the table. Can we talk? She asked quietly. Just for a minute? We excused ourselves to the restaurant's small outdoor patio, leaving the men to their sports debate. Lucy wrapped her arms around herself despite the warm evening, looking suddenly younger than her 28 years. I started therapy, she said without preamble. As soon as we got back from the honeymoon, I found someone who specializes in family dynamics and manipulation. I hadn't expected that. Lucy. I need to say this, okay? Just let me get it out. She took a deep breath. My therapist has been helping me see patterns I've been ignoring my whole life. The way Mom operates. How she uses me, my golden child status, my compliance, to control everyone else in the family. How she's pitted me against Nathan our entire lives without me even realizing it. You're not responsible for your mother's behavior, I said gently. No, but I enabled it. Lucy's voice was firm now. I benefited from it. While you were absorbing all her criticism and impossible standards, I was getting praised for doing the bare minimum. While Nathan was struggling to live up to expectations he could never meet, I was the favorite who could do no wrong. I never questioned it. I never asked why Mom was so obsessed with your property, why she felt entitled to make decisions about your life. She paused, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm sorry, Mila. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I'm sorry I wasn't the sister-in-law you deserved. I'm sorry my wedding day became... Her voice broke. I'm sorry my wedding day became the day you got assaulted. I reached out and squeezed her hand. None of that was your fault. Maybe not. But my silence was my choice. My acceptance was my choice. Lucy straightened her shoulders, composing herself. Marcus and I decided something on our honeymoon. We're buying our own place. A small condo we can actually afford on our salaries. Mom offered to help with a down payment and we said no. Lucy, you don't have to. Yes, we do. We need to build our life on our own terms without owing anyone anything. Without strings attached. She met my eyes. You showed me that's possible. That saying no to family demands doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you someone who respects themselves. Something shifted in my chest. Respect, maybe, or hope. Lucy was breaking a generational pattern. Choosing independence over ease. That took a kind of courage I hadn't given her credit for. When we returned to the table, Nathan was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Later, in the car driving home, he was quiet for several blocks before speaking. I called a therapist, he said. After hearing Lucy talk about starting therapy. I made an appointment for next week. I looked at him surprised. I know I need help, he continued, eyes on the road. I can't keep being the person who freezes when you need me. The person who apologizes after instead of defending before. I don't know how to be different without help figuring out why I'm like this in the first place. Over the following weeks, Nathan's therapy sessions became a regular fixture in our lives. He worked with Dr. Brennan, a specialist in family enmeshment and conflict avoidance. Sometimes Nathan would come home from sessions quiet and withdrawn, processing things he'd uncovered. Other times he'd want to talk, working through realizations that were clearly painful. Dr. Brennan says I've been sacrificing you to maintain my mother's approval, he told me one night, his voice hollow. That keeping peace with her meant declaring war on my marriage, even if I didn't realize I was doing it. And what do you think? I asked. I think he's right. I think I've been a coward. Nathan's hands were clenched in his lap. I think love without courage is just words. Just performance. And I haven't been brave enough to actually love you the way you deserve. We had hard conversations during those weeks. Nathan facing his own patterns of avoidance and people-pleasing. Me facing my own pattern of accepting less than I deserved because I didn't want to be the difficult one, the demanding one, the woman who expected too much. Slowly, incrementally, things began to shift. Nathan started setting small boundaries with Stella. When she called demanding we come to a family dinner on a night we had plans, he said no, clearly, firmly, without the guilt and over-explanation he would have used before. When Stella made a passive-aggressive comment during a phone call about certain people putting career before family, Nathan told her directly that those comments weren't acceptable and he wouldn't continue the conversation if they continued. When she tried her usual guilt trips, crying, playing the victim, suggesting Nathan didn't love her anymore, he stayed on the phone instead of hanging up immediately. Remained calm. Repeated his boundaries. Didn't engage with the manipulation. They were baby steps compared to what had happened at the wedding. But they represented genuine change rather than empty promises. The extended family split into predictable camps after the incident. Some relatives sided firmly with Stella, sending me cold stares at gatherings, making comments about family loyalty and sacrifice. Aunt Patricia stopped inviting us to holiday events. Uncle James sent Nathan a long email about respecting his parents. But others reached out quietly, privately. Rachel became an unexpected ally, calling me one evening to share her own story. Stella did something similar to me 5 years ago, Rachel confided. After my grandmother left me some money, Mom tried to pressure me into loaning it to her for some investment scheme. When I said no, Stella told the whole family I was selfish, that I'd forgotten where I came from. What did you do? I cut contact. Just stopped going to family events, stopped answering her calls. It was easier than fighting publicly like you did. Rachel's voice held admiration. You did what a lot of us were too scared or too conflict avoidant to do. Watching Stella face real consequences, it was cathartic for those of us who've spent years absorbing her criticism. Other family members shared similar stories. Nathan's younger cousin had been pressured to give Stella power of attorney. An uncle had been guilted into co-signing a loan. A sister-in-law had been expected to provide free childcare on demand. Stella's pattern of control and entitlement ran deeper than I'd realized. The family dynamics were permanently altered. Holidays became tense affairs where Stella and I maintained frigid politeness, speaking only when necessary, avoiding eye contact. Nathan had to navigate between supporting me and maintaining some relationship with his mother. Lucy and Marcus's growing independence created new tensions. Stella clearly resented losing control of her golden child. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't easy. But it was honest in a way the previous facade of family harmony had never been. The physical bruise on my face faded within 2 weeks, the red mark gradually turning purple, then yellow, then finally disappearing entirely. But the internal scars took longer to heal. I found myself hyper-aware at family gatherings, always positioned near exits, always watching Stella's hands and facial expressions for signs of escalating anger, always ready to leave immediately if the situation felt unsafe. Nathan noticed. Started positioning himself physically between his mother and me at gatherings. Kept conversations superficial and time-limited. Made it clear through body language and tone that I was under his protection, even if that protection had come too late at the wedding. The legal documents Gregory had prepared gave me security that Stella couldn't financially hurt me. But they couldn't protect me from the psychological weight of knowing my mother-in-law had been willing to assault me in public over property she'd never had any right to. Trust, once shattered, doesn't reassemble into its original form. It becomes something different. More cautious, more guarded, with visible cracks that serve as permanent reminders of what happens when you trust too much. But maybe that was okay. Maybe trust with visible cracks was more honest than trust that pretended damage never happened. 6 months after Lucy's wedding, I stood at my floor-to-ceiling windows on a Tuesday morning, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the river. The city was waking up below me, cars beginning to fill the streets, lights coming on in office buildings, the world moving forward the way it always did. The penthouse was still mine. Not through luck or inheritance or someone else's generosity, but because I'd defended it when defense required public confrontation and legal intervention. That fact meant something different now than it had 6 months ago. It wasn't just about ownership anymore. It was about what I'd been willing to fight for, what I'd been willing to lose, and what I'd ultimately kept. Stella and I had reached a kind of cold peace. At family gatherings, which I now attended selectively rather than dutifully, we maintained cordial distance. We made polite conversation about neutral topics. The weather. Anything that didn't require actual connection or risk triggering the memories neither of us wanted to revisit. We never mentioned property. Never mentioned money. Never mentioned that September afternoon when everything had shattered in front of 45 witnesses. The legal documents Gregory had prepared sat in my safe, untouched since Stella signed them. His prediction had proven accurate. She'd never risk triggering those penalty clauses again. She'd learned finally that I couldn't be bullied or pressured through public humiliation, that I had protections and resources she'd underestimated, that treating me like an asset rather than family had consequences she couldn't afford to pay. But the cost hadn't been only hers to bear. Nathan emerged from the bedroom already dressed for work, his tie slightly crooked. I reached up automatically to straighten it, a small gesture that had become routine again after months of careful rebuilding. "You're up early," he said, accepting the coffee I handed him. Couldn't sleep. He knew better than to ask why. Some mornings were just like this, the weight of everything that had happened sitting heavier than usual. We'd emerged from the crisis stronger in some ways, more fragile in others. Stronger because we'd finally faced his family dynamics honestly, because he'd started learning to set boundaries, because we'd stopped pretending problems would solve themselves. More fragile because I now knew the limits of his courage, and he knew I'd seen those limits and wasn't sure I could fully trust him in future crises. Dr. Brennan, Nathan's therapist, had suggested couples counseling in addition to Nathan's individual sessions. We'd been going every other week for 4 months now. Working through resentment, fear. The question of whether love could survive the revelation that your partner's first instinct had been self-preservation rather than protection. There were good days. Days where Nathan demonstrated real growth, telling his mother firmly that certain topics were off-limits when she called, leaving a family dinner early when Stella made a cutting remark about my work schedule, choosing to stay home with me on a Sunday instead of attending his parents' brunch without guilt or apology. There were hard days too. Days where old patterns resurfaced, where Nathan's conflict avoidance kicked in and he tried to smooth over tensions rather than address them. Days where I had to remind him that one crisis successfully navigated didn't mean the work was done, that boundary setting was an ongoing practice rather than a single victory you could claim and move on from. We were building something different than the marriage we'd started with. More honest, less comfortable, requiring constant attention and effort rather than coasting on the assumption that love would solve problems without active work. "I'm having lunch with Lucy today," I mentioned, rinsing my coffee cup. Nathan smiled, genuine pleasure crossing his face. "That's good. How's she doing?" "Really well, actually." Lucy's growth had been unexpected and beautiful to witness. She'd committed fully to therapy, using it to examine the golden child role she'd played her entire life. Her therapist had helped her see how Stella had pitted her against Nathan and me, using Lucy's obedience to maintain control over all her children. She and Marcus had bought their small condo 3 months ago, a modest 2-bedroom in a neighborhood that was more up-and-coming than established. They'd filled it with second-hand furniture they refinished themselves, spent weekends at estate sales and thrift stores, seemed genuinely proud of building something that belonged to them alone without owing anyone anything. Lucy had started setting her own boundaries with Stella, declining requests for money, saying no to emergency babysitting for relatives she barely knew, refusing guilt trip visits when she and Marcus had other plans. I'd watched Stella struggle to adjust to having a daughter who was no longer reflexively obedient. The confusion on her face at family gatherings when Lucy politely but firmly declined her demands was almost satisfying. Lucy and I met for lunch at a cafe near her school. She arrived in teacher clothes, sensible pants, a cardigan with pencil marks on the sleeve, her hair in a practical ponytail. She looked tired but content in a way I hadn't seen before. "How's the condo?" I asked after we'd ordered. "Perfect. Marcus built me bookshelves last weekend. They're slightly crooked but they're ours." She smiled. "Mom came by last week. Made comments about the neighborhood, the size, how we could have afforded something better if we'd accepted help." "How did you handle it?" "Told her we were happy with our choices and changed the subject." She pushed. I repeated myself. She eventually dropped it. Lucy took a sip of her iced tea. "My therapist says it'll get easier. That Stella will eventually accept that the old strategies don't work anymore." "Do you believe that?" Lucy considered. "I think she'll always try. But I think I'm getting better at recognizing it and shutting it down." "That's growth, right?" "That's definitely growth." We talked about her students, about Marcus's new project at work, about the vacation they were planning. Normal things. The kind of conversation you have with someone you actually like rather than someone you're obligated to maintain contact with. Before we left, Lucy reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For showing me it was possible to say no to Mom. For proving that you could stand up to her and survive. I don't think I would have had the courage to start therapy or set boundaries if you hadn't done it first." She paused. "You gave me permission to protect myself." Driving back to work, I thought about that. How standing up to Stella hadn't just protected me, it had created space for Lucy to protect herself too. How one person's boundaries could give others permission to establish their own. That evening, Nathan and I had dinner at home. Nothing fancy, pasta and salad, a bottle of wine we'd been saving. Afterward, we sat on the couch with the city lights spreading out below us, and Nathan said something he'd been working up to for weeks. "I know I failed you at the wedding," he said. "I know I've failed you in smaller ways since then too. Days where I slip back into old patterns where I choose avoiding conflict over protecting you." "Nathan, let me finish." He turned to face me. "I can't promise I'll be perfect. I can't promise I'll never freeze or hesitate or disappoint you again. But I can promise I'm trying. Every single day I'm trying to be braver than I was yesterday. To choose you over her approval. To be the partner you deserve." I looked at him. This man I'd married thinking he understood independence, thinking he'd respect my boundaries, only to discover his promises couldn't survive contact with his mother's demands. But I also saw the man who'd been going to therapy twice a week for 6 months. Who'd started setting boundaries even when they made him uncomfortable. Who was choosing growth over comfort, honesty over peace. I know you're trying, I said. I see it. And that matters. It wasn't everything. It wasn't a guarantee. But it was something. The lesson I carried forward from that September afternoon wasn't about revenge or victory. It was about the price and value of boundaries. Boundaries aren't walls meant to keep people out. They're foundations you build your life on. And maintaining them sometimes costs relationships with people who only valued you when you had no limits. I'd lost the comfortable fiction of family harmony. Lost the easy path of avoiding conflict to keep peace. Lost the version of Nathan who could pretend his mother's behavior wasn't his problem to address. What I'd gained was self-respect. A marriage being rebuilt on honesty rather than avoidance. A home that truly belonged to me because I'd defended it. And the knowledge that I could stand up to pressure and survive the consequences intact. My grandmother's voice echoed sometimes in the quiet moments. Protect what you build, Mila. Never let them make you feel guilty for success they didn't earn. She'd left me more than money or property. She'd left me the blueprint for surviving a family that would always see success as something to be redistributed rather than celebrated. The penthouse would always be more than real estate to me. It was proof that I'd chosen myself when everyone expected me to choose them. That I'd drawn a line and defended it. That boundaries maintained at high cost were still worth the price. Because without them I'd have lost something more valuable than family approval. I'd have lost myself. And that was the one thing I could never afford to surrender.